It was midnight on a Wednesday night in July of 1932 when 4 young people left Sunset Beach in Sag Harbor and headed home. The foursome, 2 males and 2 females, chatted excitedly about upcoming weekend events and made plans to get together. They were 19-year-old Bernard Ernest and his buddy Earl Stevens from East Hampton and Lucille Deckert and Emma Willer from Bridgehampton. They headed down Noyack Road towards Sunrise Parkway and approached the intersection of Stony Hill Rd. As they approached the intersection, the teens saw a figure standing in the center of the road. The figure, described as clad all in white, was holding a shotgun. The gun was aimed directly at them. As they passed the mysterious figure in white, there was a huge explosion, and young Mr. Ernest can be heard to exclaim, "I've been shot. I can't find the brakes." And with that, the car crashed into a tree stump, and the, quote, figure in white disappeared into the night. The bullets had entered Bernard Ernest's back and had torn through his lungs. He died at the scene. The other passengers were cut and bruised but released from Southampton Hospital later that morning. Ernest was born in 1912 to Thomas and Julia Ernest and appeared to be a very upstanding kid. Thomas Ernest was a carpenter, and young Bernard had a job at the East Hampton mechanical repair shop. His boss, E.J. Dominy, would have nothing but good things to say about the young Mr. Ernest after the shooting. This case revolves around a cast of characters worthy of any Hollywood film. To tell the story of the bizarre sequence of events that ended in the murder of an innocent young man, one must go back and acquaint themselves with the participants in this tragic saga. We start with the nexus of this sordid affair, 26-year-old Katherine Gray. Katherine Gray was of Scotch descent and described as a very pretty brunette. She was born in 1906 to J.B. and Irma Gray. She grew up in Texas, and her father, J.B., is listed as the head of the household on the census forms. His occupation, however, is a bit sketchy. Under occupation, it simply says income, and no other information is available. Very unusual for a census report. The household consisted of J.B. Gray, his wife Irma, and their 4 children. No one in the home was employed with the exception of J.B. Gray. Whatever the source of income, it provided enough funds for Katherine to graduate in 1923 from a prep school located in Birmingham, Pennsylvania. Sometime after that, Katherine married Harold Chapman, a manager for a local paper factory, and the couple moved to Noyack Road near Sag Harbor. The marriage lasted until July of 1931, when for reasons that are unknown, the couple was divorced. A clue, however, might be found in the fact that shortly after her divorce and just months before the murder of Bernard Ernst, Katherine Gray's name would be splashed across the newspapers in yet another sensational story. Friday, December 18th, 1931. Katherine Gray was sound asleep in her bed. After her divorce, she remained in the bungalow on Noyack and Spring Hill Road and was now renting the upper portion to boarders, Stephen O'Neill and William Schultz. Katherine was suddenly awakened by a loud banging and the sound of voices coming from the front room. She threw on her bathrobe and ran out into the hall to find 2 Prohibition officers and 2 United States Marshals in her home. The sensational headlines were in the newspapers all over Long Island. Quote, radio plant at Sag Harbor was sure linked to rum row, end quote. And another, quote, find rum hoard and wireless, end quote. And a third, quote, woman and 2 men arrested in raid on bungalow after 5 months search, end quote. At the time of her arrest, Katherine Gray swore that she had no idea that O'Neill and Schultz were using their shortwave radio for illicit purposes. She claimed that she thought the 2 men were just experimenting. At the same time, Schultz was claiming to be a, quote, garage man and know nothing of the operation. The federal government had different information. It all began in early November of that same year, 5 weeks before the raid on Katherine Gray's home and only 5 months after Katherine and Harold Chapman were divorced. The first indication that there was bootleg operation on the east end of Long Island came when federal authorities intercepted a coded message, apparently intended for rum boats lying off the Long Island shore. A search began in order to uncover the source of the message. It was discovered that the station was located on Long Island, and after a gradual narrowing down process was implemented, the agents determined the exact spot. Tests of the wireless impulses indicated that the set was in the Sag Harbor area. Afterwards, a special apparatus was brought in and disclosed that the transmitter was concealed in a bungalow near Peconic Bay. Around the same time, agents were raiding the home of Katherine Gray. They were also searching a farm located in Cutchogue. There, they discovered a hoard of 200 cases of Scotch liquor in a secret compartment that was located in the barn. The farm was owned by Frank Zawinski. Not far from the Zawinski farm, the agents discovered a well-built staircase heading from the bluff down to the Sound shore. They believed the liquor landed there in small boats and was carried up to the top of the bluff, where it was then trucked to Zawinski's farm and stored until needed. Zawinski tried to concoct a story of a broken-down truck whose driver asked to store the load in his barn for a few days, but the agents had been investigating this case for weeks now, and they were well aware of the source of the liquor and everyone's involvement in the rum-running operation, and that included Katherine Gray. Perhaps Katherine Gray, future rum runner, and Harold Chapman, hard-working plant manager, were simply traveling in 2 different directions at the time of their divorce. The charges against Katherine Gray were eventually dropped, and by July of 1932, Katherine had met a handsome 29-year-old man from Southampton named Leslie Loomis. Leslie Loomis was born in New York and was a garage mechanic and a foreman for a repair shop in Riverhead. The home he lived in was owned by 67-year-old Emily Fritz and her 40-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. There were 2 young men renting rooms at the household, and Loomis was one of them. The house was located on Hill Street in Southampton. One can imagine that a young man of Loomis's age would much prefer to spend his evenings with Katherine Gray in her bungalow, as opposed to spending his time alone in his room at the Fritz household. According to everyone's description, including the agents who arrested Katherine Gray, she was a very pretty young woman. And that is exactly what Loomis did. According to Loomis, the couple lived together for a year and a half and had recently split up when the shooting occurred. It is safe to say that Loomis was far more infatuated with Katherine Gray than she was with him. Katherine had come into contact with 40-year-old Matteo De Gregorio, most likely through his business. De Gregorio, spelled D-I-G-R-E-G-A-R-I-A, De Gregaria on some documents, was born on July 6, 1894 in Sicily. He immigrated to America on the ship, the SS Santa Ana, in 1914. His records indicate that he was traveling with his brother Antonio De Gregorio and their friend Domenico Bonanno. Between 1914 and 1932, Matteo De Gregorio was Americanized enough to go by the name of Marty. He was living in Sag Harbor and owned Marty's Bathing Pavilion on Noyack Road. De Gregorio must have found Katherine Gray as enchanting as Leslie Loomis had. Soon, De Gregorio was at Katherine's home as much as Loomis had been, and it caused a feud to develop between the two men. Leslie Loomis was not going to go away easily, and he harassed the couple wherever possible. On the night of the shooting, Loomis drove to Katherine Gray's home and crept up to an open bedroom window. He punched through the screen and seized some of De Gregorio's clothing, which was laying across the back of a chair. Loomis ran to his automobile and drove away. It would seem that Matteo De Gregorio, fed up with Leslie Loomis and his jealous pranks, had brought a shotgun to Katherine Gray's house 3 days before the shooting. This night, he grabbed his shotgun and he went running out into the road in a rage. Matteo De Gregorio was wearing his pajama top and his white boxer shorts when he stood in the center of Noyack Road waiting for Leslie Loomis to drive by. It is at this time that Bernard Ernest and his 3 young companions were innocently traveling down Noyack Road on their way home from Sunset Beach in Sag Harbor. Who knows what went through De Gregorio's mind after shooting Bernard Ernst? Did he realize all too late that he had shot the wrong person? Did he believe that he had shot Loomis and regret what he had done? Whatever his thoughts at the time, De Gregorio threw the shotgun down and ran back to Katherine Gray's bungalow, eluding even her. He donned what clothes he had left and he set out through the woods, stopping only once to sleep. Matteo De Gregorio eventually found shelter at the home of Mr. Robert W. Lee on Noyack Road. He emerged from the woods behind Robert Lee's house wearing a coat, a vest, and shoes, but no pants. He explained to Lee that someone had stolen his trousers while he was, quote, swimming. When De Gregorio was arrested, he was upstairs in the bedroom of Lee's home, borrowing a pair of trousers from Lee. Perhaps one of the most flamboyant characters to enter this sad drama is defense attorney Samuel Leibowitz. De Gregorio hired Leibowitz immediately after the shooting and with good references. Samuel Leibowitz was an extremely well-known attorney at the time, and he remained in the public eye for decades. He became the darling of the news media, beginning in 1922 when he was accused of blackmailing Maryland Governor Albert C. Ritchie in an attempt to get charges against a corrupt prison official dropped. In 1926, Leibowitz represented Al Capone in a triple murder charge. He was able to get the charges dismissed because of, quote, insufficient evidence, and Capone was released the very next day. In January of 1930, he made the news again when he represented gangster Max Becker, who was a prisoner in Auburn prison and killed a guard during a hostage situation. Long after Bernard Ernst's young life ended in 1932, Samuel Leibowitz continued to make the news and garner fame. In 1936, Leibowitz defended 31-year-old Vera Stretz in another sensational trial. Stretz was accused of killing her married lover, Dr. Fritz Gebhardt, who was the president of a German importing firm. 43-year-old Gebhardt was married, and his wife was in Germany. Vera Stretz and Dr. Gebhardt both lived in the Tower apartment in New York City. That same year, he was commended for winning 114 acquittals and not losing a case in 7 years. Samuel Leibowitz created much controversy that same year by interviewing Bruno Hauptmann, who was on death row for the Lindbergh kidnapping. Leibowitz was granted permission to interrogate Hauptmann for hours in an attempt to get him to confess. Perhaps acting more as a PR man than an attorney, Leibowitz continued to insert himself into the Lindbergh kidnapping case in 1936 by representing Martin Schlossman. Schlossman was a player in a bizarre side story associated with the Lindbergh kidnapping involving an abduction plot designed to extract a confession from a disbarred New Jersey attorney, Mr. Wendell. In 1937, Leibowitz defended Robert Irwin in a triple murder charge and saved him from the electric chair. Leibowitz successfully argued that Irwin was insane at the time of the killings. Robert Irwin had beat and strangled 3 people as a result of being romantically rebuffed. In 1940, Samuel Leibowitz became a judge, and he continued to make the news and preside over important cases. He died in 1978 at 84 years old of a stroke. Matteo De Gregorio hired himself one heck of an attorney when he went on trial for Bernard Ernest's murder. Even as far back as 1932, it was clear that Samuel Leibowitz was an extremely persuasive man. The trial lasted 2 days, and the jury was out for 4 hours. The entire defense was based on the fact that De Gregorio was entitled to use force if necessary to regain his possessions. Leibowitz stated that the death was the result of an accident occurring during the pursuit of Leslie Loomis. Samuel Leibowitz continually stressed the point to the jury that they were obligated to come back with a verdict of not guilty if he was able to prove the accidental discharge of the weapon. Amazingly, and to the dismay of most of the community, the jury acquitted De Gregorio of all charges, causing a great controversy. Most people felt that De Gregorio should have at least been found guilty of manslaughter, considering it was a tragic end to a sordid affair for a person who was completely innocent of anything.